Hi, I'm Sahar,
And I'm Shreya. Welcome to our show, Only Spoilers.
where I tell Shreya about a book that I've read or a movie that I've watched. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the book Just Last Night by Mhairi McFarlane. Are you going to read it, Shreya?
Definitely not.
Then let me tell you all about it.
Okay.
Okay. So this book is set in England, Nottingham.
Mhm.
So there are four friends named Ed, Eve, Susie, and Justin. They have a ritual of going to this pub in their town every Thursday for a trivia night. So they're at this pub, they're playing trivia. They're not really good at it. They just go for fun. They're in their mid-30s, and it's like the end of the night. There are a few drinks, and they're having the time of their life. So Eve has been friends with Susie since they were in primary school. And then they met Ed and Justin in 12th grade, and they've all been friends since. And then Ed and Eve has been in love with Ed since they met, but he doesn't know it, or like he's unaware of it because Ed has a long-term girlfriend called Hester. And Hester also joins them at the trivia night, but it there's like a sense of nobody really likes her. Like the moment she comes in, she's always like critical of them, and she thinks she's better than all of them because she's like, you guys are so codependent on each other, and like you don't want anything else in your life. Like just grow up. And because all of their other friends are like settled down, married, have kids, these people are still so into each other, like just in their lives and stuff. They don't want anybody else to break their bubble or come into their circle. So Hester is very critical of that. They don't give a shit. I mean, they're tolerating her because Ed and Hester have been together for 16 years, but they're still like girlfriend boyfriend.
So they're in high school?
No, these people are in their 30s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but Eve is in love with Ed she's been in love with him for like 20 years. So, so
they never left the small town. They're just there.
They've always they left for college and stuff, but they all somehow came back and settled down in Nottingham.
Okay.
So, that night, while they're playing trivia, there's a break before the last question and everything, and then they're all talking amongst each other, and then they realize, like, where's Hester? Like, she was just sitting with us talking, and then they realize she's up on the stage, and then she's like, hi everyone, can I get your attention please? And then she's like, I didn't know when to do this or how to do this, but I feel like this is the best place. Ed, my darling, the love of my life, we've been together for 16 years. I think it's high time. Will you marry me? So Hester proposes to Ed in front of everyone at the pub. And everybody is shocked, including Ed. He's like, oh my God, what do I say? And then he hesitates, but obviously he says yes. And then they're all happy. Everybody is cheering for them. Ed and Hester are very happy. And then they all drink champagne and everything. There are glances exchanged between Eve, Susie, and Justin. They're like, okay, we're going to talk about this later. But they're very happy for their friend, whatever. They leave. They're all happily drunk, going their separate ways. But Eve is like, a little sad, a little heartbroken that, the guy that I really love is, settling down with someone else. I don't know why she held out hope for 16 years. Like,
yeah,
but whatever. So,
like, is she really that shocked?
Exactly. Because I feel like somehow she there's always like glances exchanged between her and Ed. So she thought like maybe he'll realize finally that, I am the better woman. So he'll leave a Hester for her. But
so she wakes up every day for the past 16 years being like, today's the day.
Yeah.
He's gonna magically fall in love with me.
Mm-hmm.
Or the original delusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Eve doesn't want to go home anymore because she's like, happy and drunk, and she wants to do something wild. So she hits up this guy she met a few weeks ago who's a little younger than her and who's a bartender at a bar near where she lives. So she texts him like, hey, are you still at work? Like, I'm out. Do you want to hang out? And he's like, yeah, sure. I'm just closing up the bar. You can come hang out with me. So she runs home, freshens herself up, and then she goes to the other bar that where this guy is. And then she's the only one there. He locks up the bar and like he's like, "Oh, do you want me to make you a drink?" And then she's like, "Yeah, sure." So from last time they met, he remembers that she likes a lavender martini, so he makes a martini. They're talking and everything. And then he says, "Oh, I live right above the bar. Like, I rent the apartment. Let's go upstairs." So basically, Eve hit him up for a hookup, right? Because she wants to distract herself from the heartbreak of losing Ed. So they go upstairs and like they're making out. And then this guy stops Eve and he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait. I wanted to ask you something." She's like, "What? I have protection. Like, if that's what you're worried about." He's like, "No, I want to make sure you don't have any hair down there." She's like, What do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, do you wax?" And she's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I can't do it with hair." And Eve is just like, "What the actual fuck?" And this guy is a little like at least 10 years younger than Eve, right? And then this guy is just like, "Yeah, I mean, blah, blah, blah." They have this whole conversation of like how he can't do it with like, he doesn't like hair on women. And she just in her head is like, "Oh my God, what am I doing here? I should have just gone home." And then she tells him that, this is just really immature. I am leaving. He's like, "Oh, I mean, yeah, it's my fault. I should have said earlier." And then before they hook up, they try to. He asks her like, "Oh, so are you seeing someone?" And she's like, "No, if I was, I wouldn't be here. Why are you?" He's like, "No, I mean, it's complicated." So he's basically cheating on whoever he is seeing with Eve. And then by the end of this, Eve is like, "Fine, I'm leaving." He goes downstairs to like leave her, like, or drop her off so he can lock the door. And he's like, "Oh wait, can you pay for the drink?" And she's like, "What?" So Eve,
Is he at least like 21 or is
he's
he
25 or something.
Okay. I was gonna be
So
like, it would have been worse if he wasn't even like drinking age. Oh, but this
he's
is
a
in,
bartender.
and this
And
is
it's
also
in
in
the
the
UK.
UK.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Eve, being Eve's like, "Fine, whatever." She throws a 5 pound bill at him and then leaves. And she's just like, "Oh my God, why did I do that?" And then she texts Susie that, "Let's just meet tomorrow for lunch, or like in the evening for drinks, and let's talk about it. Like, whatever happened with Ed, and then this story that whatever happened with Eve." And she goes home and she pours herself another drink and then goes to bed. And the next day, it's like she wakes up hungover because she drank too much, didn't eat enough. And then she's like, "Oh my God, I don't want to go to work." But she doesn't want to take a day off. So she's really hungover. She finally goes to work. She is I don't want to say journalist, but she works for a website that write articles, or like, really clickbaity headlines for like local businesses. And like,
BuzzFeed.
not kind of BuzzFeed, like, oh, like there's like a free wings night at this restaurant.
Oh,
So like
okay.
really catchy phrases and stuff for
Mhm.
local businesses and deals and events that are going on in their area. So that's where she works. So she goes to work and everything. And then she sits down at her desk and she sees several missed calls from Ed. And she's like, "Oh, I wonder why he's, I don't know why he wants to talk to me. Maybe he's realizing that he doesn't want to be married to Hester. Maybe he wants to talk to me." So she sees a text from him and it says that it's really urgent. It's not about last night. Can you call me? So she calls Ed. And then he's like, "Are you at work?" She's like, "Yeah, I just got here." He's like, "Okay, go to some place private. I have to tell you something important." And then she's like, "Okay." And then he's like, "Take your bag and coat with you." And she's like, "You're freaking me out. What's happened?" He's like, "No, just let me know when you're at in a private place." She goes out of her office. She stands outside the office door and she's like, "Okay, tell me now." And he's like, "Susie is dead. She got hit by a car last night." And then Eve is shocked. She's like, "This is not funny, Ed. Like, you can't be joking about this." He's like, "No, I'm serious. I wish I was joking. I got the call from the police this morning and I've been trying to call you, but you haven't answered. They tried to call you too, but you haven't answered your phone. That's why I got the call." And then Eve checks her phone, like, because she was like, really drunk last night and woke up late. she didn't realize. She's like, what are you saying? She's like, yeah. And then Eve's like, how did it happen? So Susie took a cab home, but she got off a few like a block away from her house, and she was walking home, and then a car coming from the other side jumped the curb and like hit her, and she died. Like she didn't even make it to the hospital alive. Like she was pronounced dead like 10 minutes after the accident happened. And then Susie is just, she's destroyed. She's like, this is my best friend in the world. I've known this woman half my
Wait, Eve
life.
is destroyed, right?
Yeah. Eve is destroyed. What did I say?
Susie.
Oh no, my God.
I was like, is she alive?
No. Yeah. Eve is destroyed that she's lost Susie, and in such a horrific way. And then Ed is like, can you come to the hospital? And then he's like, are you okay to drive? Are you gonna drive here or take a cab? She's like, I think I'm just gonna take a cab. So Eve goes back to inside her work, tells everyone that, I have to leave. My best friend just died. They're like, yeah, go ahead, take your time. Like, we understand. So she takes a cab to the hospital. Ed is there. The moment Eve sees him, they both start crying, and then they hug each other. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. Like, what are we gonna do with ourselves now? Like, there's like a hole left in their lives. Like, this is just unbearable for them. And then she asks him, like, what happened? Like, how and everything. So he tells her, like, that the driver who hit her, they don't know if he was drinking or if he had a medical problem or like what happened, but they're like, they want us to identify the body. The moment Eve hears Susie being referred to as a body, she's just like, this is like the worst nightmare. She's trying to wake her up. She thinks this is like, a bad dream, because how can somebody like this woman was alive 12 hours ago. They were talking and, having fun. And now Eve is just thinking, what if I had just replied to Susie's message earlier? Maybe she wouldn't have, like, maybe she would have stopped a few paces earlier and not gotten hit by the car. Or if I had called her, maybe she would have, stayed longer in the taxi. It's just all these things in her head of like, maybe I could have done something to change the scenario. Maybe my friend would have been alive right now. So the doctors come up to them and they're like, okay.
This reminds me of Madame Web.
Oh my God.
Maybe if I had the power to change the future, I could have saved her.
Yeah.
But okay.
So Eve is really heartbroken, and then Ed and then she asks, like, where is Justin? Like, does he know? So Ed is like, I called him too, but he can't get away from work. So Justin is he's a nurse for a old age home, so he can't get away from his patients. Ed is a English teacher at a high school, and then Susie used to work for Deloitte. Like, she was the big shot. Like, she did the best in career wise among the group. So the doctors take them to the morgue, and they explain the whole situation. And then Eve asks them, like, did Susie suffer? They're like, no. And because the way she was hit, like, she was pinned between the car and a wall, and like her head hit the wall really hard. So she would have instantly been unconscious because of the trauma. And then there was such a huge amount of bleeding in her brain that they couldn't save her. Like, by the time they could work on her, her heart had already stopped beating. So that again, like, hits Eve and Ed. They hug each other, they're crying because they've lost such an important person in their life. And then they finally, like, the doctor removes the bed sheet from Susie's face, and they're like, yeah, that's Susie. So the doctor gives them a few minutes with the body, how he, refers to Susie again, and just Eve is just like heartbroken about it. And then they they're like, okay, I mean, and then the doctor asks, like, what about Susie's family? So Eve is like, her father is still alive, but he has dementia. So I'll see if I can get in touch with him. And then she had an older brother, but who lives in New York right now. So, and they weren't really close. So the doctors are like, yeah, the police tried to contact them, but they couldn't. So if you guys could, that would be really good and everything. So Susie, Ed and Eve are like, okay, fine. So they go home, and then Eve just doesn't know what to do with herself. Ed goes home with her. They're both, just in grief and they don't know what to do. She's just thinking all these things like, now that this person is dead, we have to arrange for a funeral. And it's like in the evening, she's hungry, but she doesn't want to think about food. And she remembers this conversation that she had with Susie when Susie's mother died a few years ago. That, if it's 5 o'clock, it's tea time, but when somebody is dead, you don't think about trivial things like food and, just taking care of yourself because somebody has left this world. So Eve is just thinking back to that conversation. And then Justin comes over after his work and then he's in shock and he's crying and they're telling him everything. And then they just sit together, just thinking about Susie, how they were just laughing and, together just last night, and now this person is gone. The shock and the emptiness of that hits them. And then whatever stuff Susie had that was given to Eve, so she pulls out her phone, but luckily it's not damaged. It just has a crack on the screen, and she knew her passcode, which surprises Ed and Justin because Susie was a very private person. Like, she didn't want anybody else to get into her phone, but one day Susie was asking Eve to take a picture of her, and then she's like, oh, this is the passcode. And Eve is like, I don't need a passcode to your phone, I can open the camera from the home screen, but fine, whatever. So Eve remembered the passcode. She opens it, charges the phone because it was almost dying, and then Ed and Justin finally leave that night. That she's like, it's fine, you guys go home, I can take care of myself. And she decides to pour herself another drink. And then when her phone finally comes back to life, she looks for her brother's number. She remembers his name. His name was Finley. So she looks for his number in the contacts and she doesn't find it. And she's like, it's not possible that Susie doesn't have his own brother's number. Like, they were estranged. They didn't really talk to each other. They didn't like each other. But obviously she would still have his number, right? So she goes through her phone again. And then she finds a contact that says, my wanker of a brother. And then that was like Susie's brother's number. So instead of calling from Susie's phone, Eve notes down the number in her own phone and calls Finley. And I think it was like lunchtime in New York when it was night in the UK. So she doesn't, she gets his voice message. She leaves a message that, hi, this is, Eve, I'm Susie's friend. Like, it's important. Can you call me back? I think a couple of hours later, Finley calls her back, and then he's like, "Hi, I'm returning this call." And then Eve is like, "Hi," and she answers the phone very cheerfully, but she realizes that she should tone it down a little because she's about to deliver a very hard news. So she's like, "I don't know if you know, but this has happened last night." And he's like, "Wait, are you calling about Susie?" "Yeah, I know she's dead." And then Eve was like, what? And how do you know? And he's like, yeah, the police called me, so I know. And then he's like, wait, are you Eve, the girl who's been friends with Susie since childhood? She's like, yeah, do you remember me? He's like, yeah, I do. Like, are you? And then he asks her, like, are you still in Nottingham? And she's like, yeah, I still live here. He's like, okay, so I'm gonna be back in like a week. I can't immediately leave here. I have patients and stuff. He's a psychiatrist in New York. He's like, can you take care of the funeral arrangements and then let me know whatever you need? And then whatever payments you need, obviously we'll take care of it and everything. Just, start making the arrangements. And when I'm in town, I'll contact you and we can get in touch. And then he hangs up on her. And then Eve was like, what the fuck? Like, your sister just died. Even though you guys were a little estranged, you can't be this cold about it. And then she's like, fine, whatever. And she goes back to grieving her best friend. Then she is obviously off from work. And then she meets Ed and Justin and everyone, they're all there to support each other. And then a week later, when Finley finally comes to town, he's like, oh, let's just meet. And she's like, I'm going to call Ed and Justin also. They were also Susie's best friend. Let's all meet. So but before Finley comes to town, Ed and Eve decide that let's go to Susie's place and clean up a bit, and anything that's embarrassing for her family to find, especially her brother to find, let's just take with us, and then they can deal with what to do with her stuff and her house and everything. So they go to her place, and then Eve decides to look through Susie's closet and her bedroom and everything, and she finds a box of like diaries and old letters. She didn't know that Susie kept diaries and stuff, but she decides to take it with herself. So she's not going to read them, but she's like, I don't want her brother to find these things. What if there's like stuff about their family and everything? Let me just keep it as a safe keep safe and everything. And then what is it? Oh, I'm really bad. Okay. Then a week later, when Finley comes in town, he meets them, and then he straight away is like, okay, so blah 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 blah, we're gonna do this and this and this, like, what have you guys decided? So he's like, we can have the service in the church, and then a small buffet afterwards for all the people who are gonna attend. And then Eve is like, I talked to the church, and like there's a plot of land available near where your mother is buried. So, Susie can be buried near your mother. It's like a plot under the tree and everything. And then Finley is like, no, I don't, I'm not gonna, not gonna bury her. She's gonna be cremated. And then Eve is like, but how do you know that? Like, I think Susie would like to be near her mother. And then Finley is very adamant about it. He's like, no, I don't think Susie believed in all of that. I don't want her body to be rotting in the ground. I think we should just cremate her, be done with that. And then Eve is like arguing with him, like, how do you know? You didn't even close to your sister. And then I was her best friend. And his argument is like, but did you guys actually talk about this? Like, what is your authority of countering me with this? And then Ed, being the politically correct diplomatic person, he's like, okay, it's fine, like, Eve, calm down, he's the brother, he can decide what he wants to do with Susie, so it's fine, Finley, you can decide whatever, the rest of the things we'll take care of. And then Finley leaves, he's like, oh, I'm getting a call, I need to leave. So he just orders them around, and he leaves, right? And then Eve is very upset about it. He's like, what the fuck does he think of himself? And blah, 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 blah. And Ed is like, some things, you can't win every argument. This is how maybe he wants to handle it. And then she decides to go visit Susie's dad also, because she doesn't know if he knows or not how bad his dementia is and everything. So she goes to the house, and then she goes to his house, and he recognizes her. He's like, oh, Eve, hi, how are you? And like, haven't seen you in a while. How is Susie? I thought you guys had your exams in college. So he thinks, because of his Alzheimer's, he thinks like Susie and Eve are still in college, and then she's like, oh, I'm good. And she doesn't know how to tell him, or like if he's in a condition to understand that, Susie is dead. So there's a housekeeper at the house, and she tells her that, this has happened and everything. She's like, yeah, I don't think even if you tell him, he's going to believe it, because he thinks it's like 7 or like 10 years ago. His memory is like 10, 15 years old right now. So she's like, okay. And then he's like, oh, let me make you a tea and let's sit and chat. And then somebody else knocks the door, and it's Finley, because he was also visiting his dad. But then his dad doesn't recognize him. He's like, who are you? No, you're not my son. And then everything. And then Eve is like, what are you doing here? And he's like, what are you doing here? This is my father's house. Why are you here? And she's like, I'm just visiting him. I want to see how he's doing and everything. And then she invites him in. It's like, oh, yeah, don't you remember? It's Finley. He's like, oh, Mr. Hart. Finley's dad is like, oh, my son's name is also Finley. But he doesn't recognize this guy as his son, because they haven't seen each other in a long time. And Finley, everybody hates him also, is the reason that when his mother died a few years ago, and she died of cancer, so he didn't show up when she got diagnosed. He only showed up for the funeral. Like, he didn't even visit his sick mother, and he brought his girlfriend along to the funeral, and then he was really angry and surly all throughout the funeral, and he left really soon. So hold on, let me take a sip of water. So it's very clear that he doesn't really care about his family, but now he's here because like Susie is gone, so he has to take care of her house. And if the dad is in such a bad condition mental, like his mental faculties are not really good, so maybe it's he's in for his inheritance or something. But then Eve invites him in and everything, and he asks her that when I went to Susie's house, it looked like somebody had cleaned up after, like she was gone. Like, were you guys in her house, like you and your friends? And Eve, thinking nothing of it, she's like, yeah, I went in to just grab a few stuff. And then she's like, and then Finley is like, okay, if you took something, I need it back. And then she's like, what will you do with it? I only grabbed a box of her like old diaries and letters. And he's like, yeah, but they are Susie's personal stuff. I am I and because she didn't have a will, so everything she owned is mine now. So you have to return whatever you took. I need to evaluate if it was of value or anything, and then I'll take care of whatever needs to be done. And Eve gets really upset about it. It's like, why do you care? Like, I am not going to give you the box that I took. He's like, okay, if you don't give me, I'm gonna involve lawyers. So you have until like a week after, like I'm gonna leave a few days after the funeral. If you don't return it to me, then I'm gonna sue you. And then Eve is like, fine, fuck you. And she leaves, right? And she's really angry at him. She goes home, opens the box of the letters and diaries to see if there's actually something valuable in it. Otherwise, she's gonna like fuck around and find out. We'll see if he's actually threatening me or, he's all talk. She opens the box and then she's going through it and she sees a letter in somebody else's handwriting that says, oh, but how would Eve react to that? And then she's like, wait, what is that? And then because that's not Susie's handwriting, so she's like, was Susie talking to someone else about me? Like, was she, gossiping about me or shit talking behind my back? What is it? So she gets really curious, but she's also like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care. I know Susie was my best friend. She would never, like, we had our arguments from time to time, but it never led to anything. We loved each other. So, but like her curiosity gets the best of her and she opens the letter, and it's a reply from another friend that Susie had, like a friend from college. And then this girl is talking about how Susie sleeping with Ed was a big mistake. And then Eve is reading this and she's like, what? Ed and Susie slept together? And I didn't know about this. And she's shocked. She's like, why wouldn't Susie tell me? And then she also finds out that Susie knew that Eve was in love with Ed. So she's all guilty about, like, first of all, I slept with my best friend's love. And then I don't want to tell anybody else because Ed was with Hester all those times. So he cheated on his long-term girlfriend. Susie messed up by sleeping with her best friend's love. And then she's like, if I tell her, she's going to be mad. And then this girl who wrote the reply to Susie is like, if you don't tell anyone, nobody's going to find out and all of that. And Eve finds out that this happened 10 years ago. So they've been keeping the secret for 10 years. Eve does not know what to think right now. Her best friend is dead, who cannot answer her. She doesn't know who to believe because she thought Ed was somebody else, but now she doesn't know who to trust, what to think about him. That he knew, like Susie knew, that, how the fuck did Susie know that Eve was in love with Ed? So what happened with Eve and Ed is when they were leaving for college after high school, they all spent this really great summer together. Justin and Susie leave for college before Ed and Eve. So they, like, they spend a little more time together. And on the last night of them before going to college, Eve gets invited to Ed's football game, and a rugby game, and then that night they go out drinking and everything, and then by the time they're leaving, Ed confesses to Eve like, oh, I'm in love with you, and I wanted to tell you all along. This is before he has met Hester. Okay, this is right out of high school before they're going to college. And then Eve is like surprised. She's like, oh, I thought like you weren't interested in me. I love you too. They confess their feelings to each other, and they're like, but we're leaving tomorrow, so let's stay in touch. And like, you have my address, I have your address. Let's stay in touch. So they decide that. The moment they go to college, Eve gets a letter from Ed, telling her everything, like the day since the day I met you, I knew that there was something between us, and I really liked you.
Who
You're
wrote
so
it? Ed
smart.
did?
Ed writes Eve a letter.
Ugh, okay.
and then he says like, but I don't want to talk about. I think like I blurted out my feelings to you, like we were drunk and everything, but I don't want you to feel pressured about saying it back. Let's just get to know, or like talk about this more, and like we're gonna see each other in during Christmas break. But if you feel the same, just reply back to me, and then I'll know that you also actually reciprocate my feelings.
Oh my god.
So
I think I know what this is.
Yeah, it's very obvious. So but what do you think?
Someone's gonna intercept the letter.
Oh no. So Eve actually writes him a reply saying that, I also love you and everything. And she sends it the same day that she got the letter. Like she posts it by first class, so he gets it and everything. And then they text each other a little bit, but they don't really talk to each other because they're really busy with their college lives and stuff. And then during Christmas break, when they're all back in town, they all meet at a pub. But then Eve, Susie, and Justin reach there first, and Ed isn't there still. And then Justin is like, oh man, I can't believe Ed already has a girlfriend. And then Eve is like, what? He wrote me a letter. I wrote him back saying that I love you too. I thought we were going to be together. What do you mean he has a girlfriend? But Eve doesn't tell Susie and Justin about the letters that Ed and her exchange. I don't know for what reason. She didn't want to tell anyone. She's really heartbroken about this. She's like, I can't believe this. And then she sees Ed, and Ed is like, but I never got your letter. Did you even write me back? I already have a girlfriend. So she's like, I did. I wrote you back. And he's like, wait. When was this? Oh my God, there was a flood in our kitchen and a lot of letters and packages got destroyed. Oh my God. I mean, I should have thought you would have, written. I should have asked you, but bygones are bygones. I love my girlfriend now. So Eve.
Bullshit.
I know, right? It was so infuriating. I was like, Ed, what the fuck? Like, you have a phone. Like, at least ask her back. If you genuinely loved her, ask her once more. What are you gonna lose? The moment दूसरी लड़की मिली तुम पहुंच गए. Like you found another one and you just ugh.
I'm done reading the book. I'm closing it.
But then like 10 years later, Ed and Susie have an affair.
Wait, so like he just told her, oh, I never got your letter, so I started dating someone new.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. But they stay friends all together. Like he still, glances at her a certain way. Like, I know you better. And like he always defends her and everything. So Ed is a douchebag. He is the worst kind of person ever. And now he has gone and done this also. Slept with her best friend. Betrayed her in the worst way possible. So Eve is so angry. She's just like, fuck all of these people. Fuck Finley too. I will never let him read these letters and diaries. So she destroys them. Instead of burning them, she just drowns them in water and then throws out the mushy papers and everything.
Okay.
Then next day at the funeral, everybody is there. Ed's girlfriend, Hester. Oh, also the night Hester and Ed get engaged, she asks Susie and Eve to be her bridesmaids.
Shut up.
Yeah. She's like, oh, I don't want to ask my sister because she's a few years older than me and she's still single. And she's like, becoming a bridesmaid is just too embarrassing. And my other cousin is like too pregnant. And by the time we get married, she's going to be too fat. So I don't want her. So can you too? Like, she's asking them, but she's also letting them know that they're not her first choice. They're just, backups. And then that was also something Eve and Susie were going to talk about the next day. But then Susie died.
Yeah, so, she could have just been like, Oh, because you guys are so close to Ed.
Mhm.
I'd love you guys to be my bridesmaids so that
Yeah,
you guys
that
are
was the last thing
represented
she
too.
said. That, and also because you're Ed's best friends. Because Justin is obviously going to be his best man, so it's only logical that you two will also be in the bridal party.
That sounds like she doesn't have friends of her own.
She has, but she's the worst person. She's a very cold-hearted bitch.
Okay.
So at
They
the
deserve
funeral,
each other.
yes. So at the funeral, Eve is just, she's obviously going through everything. This is the final goodbye to Susie, and then she's also found out about the betrayal. So she's crying and crying, and she doesn't know what she's actually crying for: the loss of her friend or the loss of this, delusion that got broken last night. And then and she doesn't read Susie's eulogy. She actually writes it, but Ed reads it for her because Eve was just too, distraught to actually read it. So reads it. It was really nice. Everybody, laughs and cries and all of that. At the dinner, like the service after the funeral, um, Eve is just like, I need some space. I'm gonna go out and like smoke and drink on the balcony. Ed walks up to her and he's like, "Are you okay? Are you mad at me? Like, did I mess up the eulogy? You're being really distant and everything." And then she outright asks him, like, "I know what you did. Like, I found the letter in Susie's box, and I know that you guys slept together." And he's like, "What? No. What do you mean? What did you find out?" And she's like, "Wait, were there more than one times? Like, what are you saying? Have you been cheating on her?" Or like cheating on Hester with Susie all this time. And he's like, no. It was just one really drunken night. It's not what you think. And we decided we're not never gonna let anybody else find out. But then I told Justin. So Justin knew that Ed and Susie slept
So
together. Everyone knew except Eve. And then she asked,
there's only 4 people in the group.
Yeah. But nobody ever tells Eve that, this has happened. And Justin never told her because, like, Justin and Ed are better friends. And they're arguing about it, but then Hester walks out and they suddenly stop talking. And then she gets a little suspicious. She's like, "Oh, what were you guys talking about? Like, why did you stop talking when I walked in?" And Ed is just like, "Oh, it was just admin stuff. It's okay." And then Hester is really drunk and she starts saying something like, "Oh, now that Susie is dead, like, I'm going to ask this other cousin to be my bridesmaid, but please don't tell her that she was a second option, and because she would feel bad and everything." And Eve is like, "Are you fucking kidding me right now? This is my best friend's funeral and you are going on and on about your wedding. This is not about you, Hester. Not everything is about you." And then Hester is like, "You guys never really liked me. Like, what is your problem? I'm just trying to be look at a brighter side. Like, fine, we lost a life, but we have to move on. You have to keep living our life. Ed and I are going, like, we're keeping our wedding date the same. We want to focus away from the grief and focus on our future." And Eve is just like, "I've had enough of this bullshit. Please just shut the fuck up." And Hester gets really mad. She leaves. Ed leaves behind her. And Justin is like, "I'm going to go get another drink." And then Eve realizes that in the dark, Finley was smoking and he heard the whole conversation. And she's like, "Fuck my life." And then she goes home and then okay, hold on. Then what happens? That's over. Like, the funeral is done and everything. Then 3 weeks later, Eve is still not talking to Ed. She's moved. She's like, trying to live her life day by day and everything. And she gets a text from Ed like, "Come on, talk to me. Let me explain everything. And we can't be fighting like this. Now that Susie's gone, we have to, be there for each other. Let me just explain everything to you." So Eve is like, "Fine, I'm going to go visit Mr. Hart, Susie's dad, after work, and then you can come over and we can talk about it." So and then she gets a text from Finley also, who says, like, "I'm coming back to the UK next week, and I hope you have the box of letters and diaries that you took from Susie, because I am gonna need that back. This is your last warning. If you don't give it to me, then definitely you're getting a letter from a lawyer. So Eve is like, fine, whatever. I've destroyed them now. I can deal with the lawyers, right? So she goes and visits Mr. Hart, and um, he's talking about again. He makes her tea. He still thinks that Eve is in college, and like Susie is also going to visit him and everything. And then he shows her a picture of his brother's wedding day, and he's just reminiscing about old days. And then Eve asks him like, "Oh, why don't you talk to your brother anymore?" He's like, "Oh, I haven't talked to him in a while. He lives in Edinburgh. Maybe I can visit him." And Eve is like, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." So he's like, "Okay, fine, whatever." Right? She goes back home. Ed comes over, and then he's like, "Oh," and he's like, "Okay, just listen to me. Let me explain everything." And then he says, "We didn't plan it. It's not like we Susie and I found each other attractive or anything. It was just a very drunken mistake. We were bored. You were with your boyfriend at that time. Justin was out of town. Hester was out of town. Susie and I were bored. We got really drunk at a bar. Then we took half a pill of something each, and then we went to this another club, and then we were dancing, and then the dancing turned to hugging, and then somehow it led to kissing, and then we don't know how we ended up in the ladies washroom. They had sex in a restroom at the club."
Oh.
And then he's like, "But then we went home to drink some more to Susie's apartment, and then we had sex once again." And then the next morning when we woke up really hungover, we were like, "Oh my God, what did we do?" It was just...
And then we did it again. Okay.
That was just the influence of alcohol and drugs, apparently. So they're like, we were just so torn up about it. We didn't want to tell you, and blah, 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 blah. He's just, explaining everything to Eve. And then Eve is just realizing that Ed never really apologizes for this. He doesn't think he made a mistake.
Just explains himself.
Yeah, he just explains himself, and he also insinuates that it was Susie's idea.
And Susie's dead, so she can't even defend herself.
Exactly. So Eve in her head is just like
rolling in her grave. Oh wait, is she cremated?
Yeah, she got cremated.
In the dust, in the wind somewhere. She's just rolling, being like, "This fucking bitch."
Exactly. And then Ed and Susie decide not to tell everyone because they're like, "We can't lose our friend group, and I can't, break my girlfriend's heart. So we're just gonna keep this quiet between us." But then he ended up telling Justin for whatever reason. And then...
What the fuck?
Yeah. And then Eve is thinking about this whole conversation, and she's realizing that, alcohol doesn't really erase who you are. It just gives you a license to do stuff. So she is now questioning everything she knows about Ed and everything she knows about Susie. Like, how can my best friend in the whole world do this to me, knowing that I was in love with this guy?
Yeah.
What was she thinking?
Yeah.
So she's just, she has a lot to deal with in her head. Then 4 days later, she visits Mr. Hart again. And and then when she goes to the house, instead of Mr. Hart coming out, it's Finley, and she's shocked. She's like, "Oh my God, what the fuck? Like, I don't have the letters. I've destroyed them. This guy is just gonna start asking about them." And she's like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "This is my father's house again, Eve. I am allowed to be here. Why are you visiting my father? I've told you not to visit him because every time you visit, he gets more confused because he remembers you. He still thinks Susie is alive, and I can't tell him again and again that his daughter is dead. So just stay away." And then she's like, "I was just checking up on him. You are in a different country. I want to take care of him." He's like, "Well, read this note." So apparently the last conversation that Eve had with Mr. Hart, he got it in his head that it's a good idea. He should go visit his brother. So he actually has left for Edinburgh. And nobody knows how, why, and then where he's staying, because this man has Alzheimer's, but he has some sense of he can still travel. So he left a letter to the housekeeper that I'm gone to Edinburgh to see my brother. It was Eve's idea and I really liked it. So I'll see you in a few days. And now Finley is like, "What the fuck did you do? I told you to stay away. My father is vulnerable. What if he gets mugged? What if something happens to him and I never find out? He is in a different country. and he is prone. So please just, stay away. And she's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I mean, I didn't know this was going to happen. And he's like, I'm going to go to Edinburgh. I'm going to try to bring him back. But because he doesn't recognize me, you will come with me. And Eve was like, I can't just, leave work and just go. He's like, I
What
don't
does she
care.
even do? She just writes stuff, right?
Yeah, but like she still has to like get PTO and
It
stuff.
doesn't matter.
Right?
She
Yeah,
caused
but
a
she doesn't
mess.
want to go with Finley. She doesn't like him.
Doesn't matter. She's the one who caused the mess. She should take a responsibility.
So yeah, so she's like, fine, I will help you. He convinces her. Finley's like, you are the only one who can bring him back. So, and you owe me this because I'm gonna let go of the letters and stuff if you come with me to Edinburgh. She's like, fine. So she calls up her work, gets PTO, tells Ed and Justin that she's leaving to Edinburgh with Finley to get Mr. Hart back. And Ed is now all worried and he's like, are you sure? I want you to check in with me every day. If not, I'm going to call up the police. I don't trust Finley. They all hate Finley. The way Susie and her family talked about him, he's like, he's the worst person. And clearly, he is not a good person the way he's talked and acted throughout the funeral and all of it, right? And then he's been so distant and all of it. But then she's like, no, I mean, it's fine. I'll check in with you guys.
I need a bat to like just hit Ed's face.
Yes, thank you. Mm-hmm.
I need to find a bat and just smash his face.
Yeah, he will get his karma. You wait. So, Ed and not Ed, Finley and Eve drive up to Edinburgh. They stay at this really nice 5-star hotel called the Waldorf, and Eve is really surprised, like, oh my God, like, are we really staying here? This is a really expensive hotel. And Finley is like, I'm staying here because we used to come to Edinburgh for vacation because we have family here and we always used to stay at this hotel. So I thought maybe my dad would remember that and, come to a familiar place. And then he's like, don't worry about any expenses or anything. I got 2 rooms for us and you can charge whatever to the room service. Like, thank you for doing this, like, helping with my father. Now he's really sweet and everything. Like the hard exterior, the, angry, rude guy is not that guy anymore. And then she asks him, like, how did you end up in New York? And she remembers that Susie told Eve that he actually got scouted for a modeling company and then he moved to New York. So he used to be a model. Finley used to be a model, but then he ended up becoming a psychiatrist. So Eve is very intrigued about that. She's like, how did you, like, end up in this profession? And then he's like, after a few years in modeling, I didn't really like the profession and I was really embarrassed about it because I'm a shy person. But then I was also in therapy for a few years, so that led me into pursuing this career. Like, whatever money I got from my modeling career, I used it to pay for my medical school and stuff. And like, now he has a very nice, like, rich people are his clients, so he has money. This man is rich. He lives in Manhattan and everything. So and from Mr. Hart's letter, they know that he's gonna do touristy things around in Edinburgh and then go see his family. So they decide. So the day Finley and Eve drive up to Edinburgh, it's already night. So they decide to just, go to bed and start the next morning to go around the city and look for Mr. Hart. So the next morning, Eve is like, let's take a tour bus. So, like, we can reach all the touristy spots faster and just we can go and make a loop and then see what happens. So they go on the bus, they're talking, they're getting to know each other a little bit. And like, he's talking about Susie and asking Eve about, like, how you guys were together and everything. And like, she's realizing that he's not really that bad of a person. He's just, a little misunderstood. So they go to the zoo. Mr. Hart is not there. Then they go to whatever, all the touristy spots, right? Then they decide and they get caught in the rain. They go back to the hotel, they grab lunch, and then decide to go back out to this. Ed is like, not Ed. Finley is like, let's go to this really old house that it's got turned into a 5-star hotel. My dad might be there. And she's like, why? Because he's like, this used to be his childhood home. So they go to this other really nice hotel. They go to the bar and ask the bartender, show him Mr. Hart's picture. And then the bartender is like, oh yeah, this man was here yesterday, but he didn't tell me where he was going to go today. So, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Then Ed and, oh my God, why do I keep saying Ed? Finley and Eve. Finley and Eve go back to the hotel, to the Waldorf, and they also try to ask the front desk if Mr. Hart is staying there. But obviously, the front desk is not going to give them a name, right? So Eve tries to sweet talk them. It's like, hi, me and my brother, we are here to surprise our dad for his 70th birthday. Can you just call him and ask him to come down? We don't like, they're like, and then she gives them his name and they're like, no, nobody by that name is staying here. So they're like, oh, fuck, fine, whatever. Like, we'll go and meet the relatives and everything and see if he's at one of their places. Also, one fact that Finley was mad about why he didn't want Mr. Hart to come to Edinburgh is because his brother, who he is apparently come to meet, Don, he has been dead for a few years. So Mr. Hart doesn't even remember that. He is looking for a dead person in this town. And apparently they were also not on talking terms. So he had a falling out with his brother. He doesn't remember he's dead, but he's just like, on a wild goose chase.
Wait, why did Eve say you should go see your brother? Why?
She didn't know.
No, but like, what was the context again? Like,
he was just missing his brother. Mr. Hart was just reminiscing about old days, and he's like, "Oh, this was a good day, and like I haven't seen him in a few years. I haven't talked to him in a few years." So she's just like, "Yeah, I think you should, maybe go see him." She just said it innocently. बेचारी को क्या पता था ये सब हो जाएगा.
Yeah.
So,
you should go see him in the afterlife. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So the first day is a dud. They don't find him, but they have a lead. Like maybe, at least they're on his trail. He was at the place that they thought he would be. So the next day, and then that night when they go back to their rooms, Eve gets a call from an international number. She answers it. And then it's a call from her ex, who now lives in California. He somehow found out through Facebook about Susie's death, and he wanted to give Eve his, condolences and everything. And then the shock of him finding out that Susie is dead shocked her all over again. And she's like, crying, and she's again like, oh my God, I can't believe Susie is dead. And then Finley comes to her room like, do you have a iPhone charger? Like, can I borrow? And then he sees her crying. He's like, what happened? And then she's like, I can't believe Susie is dead and all of that. I miss her. And then Finley says, yeah, I miss her too. And he's like, and then Eve is like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, I mean, even though we were estranged and everything, she was still my sister. I miss her. Like, there was a part of me that only she knew and nobody else, and that part is now dead. Like, I also grieve for her. I wanted to patch things with her over the years, but now it's too late. Like, I will never get a chance to rekindle my relationship with my sister. So yes, I grieve for her. So he consoles her a little bit, and then he goes back to his room. And then the next day they go to this other aunt that he had, like other relatives that they have. What happened?
Nothing. I was just
other relatives that they have in Edinburgh. And then that aunt hasn't seen Finlay or any of his family in like 20 years. So when he knocks at their door, this aunt is really rude to him. He's like, and she's like, why are you here now? Why couldn't you have just called? And Finley's like, I didn't have your number, and like I didn't want to talk about such a serious thing on the phone. Like, are you sure my dad hasn't turned up here? She's like, yeah, he did. He came here yesterday, and he says he's living in a hotel, but I don't remember the name, and I don't appreciate you just, coming up to my house after so many years. And then Eve is like, please, just, if you don't want to tell him, Finley, where he is, tell me. I'm Susie's best friend. I want to, it's like, the reason Mr. Hart is here is my fault. Just, tell me where he is. She's like, I don't remember. Just leave me your number. I'll call you guys if I remember anything. And then while they're leaving, this woman grabs Eve's hand and she's like, stay away from Finley. He's a poison. He destroyed his family. He'll destroy you too. And then she lets her go. And then Eve was like, what the fuck? Like,
that's so rude.
Why is everybody in his family hate him? Like, what is the issue with this guy? Like, Susie never said a good thing about him. His dad clearly hates him. This aunt who they haven't seen in 20 years is also, just on and on about how bad Finley is. Like, what is their problem? But she still sees him for who he is, right? Like, she's like, there has to be more to the story. Fine, whatever. They sit in the car, and then the aunt comes back running. She's like, "Oh, I remember the name. It's the Waldorf." So they were right. Mr. Hart is at the hotel they are staying. So they drive back to the hotel, and they're like, "Okay, if somehow we have to talk to the receptionist, or let's just sit in the lobby and see if he comes out of his room or comes back in the hotel." The moment they walk in, they see Mr. Hart in the lobby,
Amazing.
and he was ready, leaving. He was going back with his bags and everything. So they're like, "Oh my god." And he's surprised to see Eve. He's like, "Oh, Eve, what are you doing here? I'm so happy to see you," and blah 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 blah. She's like, "Oh, I was just in town. I'm so glad you are here. I'm going back to Nottingham. Do you want to come with me?" He's like, "No, I have my own car. I'll just see you there." So they let him drive himself back, because Finley is like, "We could take him with us, but what are we going to do with his rental car? I mean, he still has his license. He is at least of that sound mind that he can drive himself back," right? So they let him drive back. They both drive back to Nottingham, and then Finley drops her off at her house, and then he's like, I'm going back to America tomorrow, once I, or like in a few days, once I make sure that my dad gets a evaluation by a doctor that he's safe to live alone, or if I need to get him a full-time care because he has Alzheimer's and stuff, and then I'll leave. Thank you everything for, like, thank you, Eve, for all your help and everything. I hope you have a good life. And then they part ways. He leaves, but then Eve feels like, a little sad that he's leaving, and that he is actually a good guy, but he's been misunderstood his whole life, kind of thing. Then she and then it's Justin's birthday, so he decided that he's just gonna celebrate his birthday alone, drink himself to a stupor, and, like, just grieve Susie. But then he's like, "No, life is too short, I'm gonna celebrate it." So he decides to book an Airbnb in Derbyshire, and he's like, "You, me, Eve, Justin, Ed, and Hester are gonna go live there for a weekend." So after Eve comes back from the Edinburgh trip, she goes to Derbyshire to celebrate Justin's birthday. They're staying at a cottage. They get drunk and they're talking and everything. They're talking about Susie and all of that. And then Eve and Ed and Justin ask Eve about how was the trip, how was Finley, is he the monster that he really is? They're shit talking him, and then Eve starts defending him, that, no, he's not a bad person, no, this and this and this. And then Justin is teasing her, like, "Why? What happened? Like, what changed your mind? Did you sleep with him? Did he, like, seduce you and everything?" And then Eve is like, "No, none of that happened. Even if it did." And then Hester is like, "Oh, even if you slept with him, like, you wouldn't tell us." And then Eve is like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Yeah, I mean, we know he's not a good person. So even if you slept with him, like, you wouldn't tell us." And Eve is like, "How do you know? Like, what is your problem? I'm telling you, he's a nice guy. He's not what you think you are. So what the fuck is your issue?" Eve gets really upset with how Hester is being, very critical, and, like, she's just jabbing at her, but then she doesn't
Pushing
say
her
anything.
buttons.
Yeah. And she's like, "Fine, whatever." So Ed and Hester go up to bed. Justin and Eve stay up late drinking more, and then they're sitting outside smoking and everything. And then Justin is like, "Yeah, there's some tension between Hester and Ed. Like, I think the wedding pressure is getting to them, and I don't know what's going on." So, and then they just, talk about Susie, and, like, what she would have said if she was here, and, like, how are they gonna go on with their life and all of that. But then that happens the next day. All these four people decide to go on a hike around the city, or around this really small town, and they get lost, and it's really cold, and they're all bickering amongst each other. But Hester is the one who's really, really upset. She's like, "Oh my god, I can't fucking believe this, like, we are lost," and blah 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 blah. She's not a very outdoorsy person, apparently, and she's very, very annoyed, and she's just snapping at everyone. And then she says something, or again somehow Finley's topic gets raised, and Eve is again defending him, and then Ed is saying something to Eve, and then Hester is like, oh my God, can you stop being obsessed with her? Like, enough is enough. And then they're all looking at each other like, what the fuck?
Is she
And
drunk or is
no,
she just
she's sober. But she's just
like, enough.
yeah.
We
He's like,
talk about her so
exactly.
much.
And then they're all like, whoa, 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 what the fuck? And then she goes, like, they're on their way back to the house. So they go back inside and then they have this whole conversation. And Ed is like, Hester, you're taking this wrong and everything. And then she confronts Eve and she's like, you slept with him, right? Are you guys having an affair or have you had an affair before? I know there's something between you and Ed. Just tell me now. And then Eve is like, what? No. And then she starts really, like, slut shaming Eve. And then Justin defends Eve. She's like, whatever your issue is, lady, direct it towards your fiance. Don't take your shit out on Eve. She's not done anything. And then Ed, Bhai Sahab, who has actually wronged his girlfriend, he's just standing there, not saying anything to stop his girlfriend from going off on her best friend. But then he finally is just like, Hester, stop. It's not Eve. I slept with Susie 10 years ago. And then Hester is just like, what? She cannot believe it. This whole time she thought there was actually something between Eve and Ed because the conversation they were having during the funeral and all of that, and like how Ed is always so worried about Eve. This whole 2-3 days she was with Finley, he was constantly worried about her, texting her, calling her, and it was really bugging Hester.
I mean, it could be emotional cheating with Eve, physical cheating with Susie.
Mhm.
He's just covering all bases.
Yes, exactly. So Hester now has had she's had enough. She breaks up with
I've
Ed
had enough.
on the spot, and then
Good.
she leaves. And she leaves with the only car that they had. So they were all supposed to
Oh.
drive back, but Hester has left with the car, and now Justin, Eve, and Ed are stranded in this Airbnb
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere.
Left for
And
dead.
they're like, fine, fuck it, whatever. We have one more night here. We'll worry about going back tomorrow. So they drink some more, they make dinner. Ed finally realizes that, he owes some apology, some explanation. So he's like, Justin, can I talk to Eve alone? And then he just starts talking about, like, again, the whole spiel about I shouldn't have done this and blah, 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 blah. I didn't want to lose you. And then he finally says, Eve, I love you. And then Eve is like, let me stop you right there, buddy. You have always kept me as plan B. Now that your plan A is gone, now you're confessing to me, you got the best of all three worlds. You had me for adoring you your whole life. You got commitment from your girlfriend, and then you wanted fun. You had fun with Susie. You destroyed 3 lives. So enough. Like, you need some internal reflection, something. Just get help and don't come to me with like, I love you now. I don't love you anymore. This is
Maybe
over
he
for
should
me.
go for Justin. Then he
Justin is gay.
Okay.
I should have told you that in the beginning, but yeah. But it's over. Eve has had enough with that, but she's like, I whatever. She's ready to give it up and move on because she's like, there's no point in destroying this friendship. Also, we've already lost one person. You have lost your fiance now. And he finally, I think, says sorry, but I'm not too sure about it. I don't think he does, but whatever.
Probably
He implies
not.
that he's apologizing.
It's like, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, yeah. In his Ed way, he apologizes,
Yeah.
but he is a piece of trash. That guy, seriously, is the worst ever. Then the next day, they finally hire a local taxi, and then they're all cramped up in this really small car. They're going back to Nottingham. And then Eve gets a text from Finley. And the moment she sees that text, she realizes how much she was actually missing him. And he's like, hi, I just wanted to let you know I got my dad evaluated, and he's okay to live with himself, like live alone for now, but there's going to be a weekly checkup from living facility for him to make sure he's doing okay and everything. I just wanted to know how much it meant to me that you helped with everything, and I'm really glad Susie was your friend and like she had you in her life and everything. And how was your weekend? And then Eve tells him that whatever went down with Ed and all of that, and he's like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm sorry that happened, but glad that it's out all in the open now. And then he says that I'm leaving in a few days, but I'll be at my dad's house just to check up once more. And she's like, okay, I'll be back in Nottingham today, so let's meet tomorrow at Mr. Hart's house. So they all go back to Nottingham. Susie, no, not Susie. Oh my God, Eve. Eve goes to Mr. Hart's house to see him, and then basically say goodbye to Finley because he's going to leave to America in a few days. And Mr. Hart opens the door, and he's very happy that Eve is there. And then Finley comes in, and then she realizes that how much, like, they're just standing in the hallway looking at each other with, like, longing in their eyes, and she realizes that she's falling in love with him and how much she's missed him. And then Mr. Hart comes out with tea for all of them, and then they sit and chat. And then there's a new lamp in the drawing room, which Finley asks about. He's like, "Oh, where did you get this lamp, Mr. Hart?" And he's like, "Oh, my wife, like, she was the interior designer. I don't know." But he asks again because he's like, "Oh, it looks very familiar to the lamp that was in our hotel in Edinburgh." He's trying to see if his dad stole something because he doesn't want anything to happen to his dad, right? He's going to be gone in a few days. But Mr. Hart gets really angry and he screams at Finley. He's like, "Are you calling me a thief? How dare you say that?" And Finley gets really, like, taken aback by this, and he starts having a panic attack. So Eve is like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 what the fuck happened?" So she walks Finley out the kitchen door and the backyard and to the patio, and then she's like, "Sit here, like, breathe some fresh air and everything." And then she sits beside him and she's like, "Okay, are you ready to tell me everything that you haven't told me? Because there's clearly something going on." So he's like, "Yes, I'll tell you what's going on." So he says that the first time my dad beat me was when I was 6 or 7 years old. And so Finley didn't even know what he had done wrong. He was just going about his day, and his dad got really angry at him and he just beat the shit out of him. And just the shock, and the, like, he still remembers the pain and the sheer shock of, like, what the fuck happened. And then it happened every month till he was like 11 or 12 years old. Once every month he got a really big beating from his dad, and he
Unprovoked.
And then he tried to, like, by the time he got like 11 or 12 years old, he was older, that he was aware enough that it's time to tell someone, or I should start fighting back. So he goes and tells his mom that, dad beats me. And then the mom doesn't believe him, because all the while that his dad was beating him, he was also putting poison in everybody else's head that, Finley is a very bad child. He's very devious. He is just the worst. And he also turns Susie against him, because now Finley was worried, what if his dad is beating Susie too? And so he goes and talks to her, and Susie apparently was the favorite child. Mr. Hart loved Susie to death. Like, he would give her anything, but Finley could not do anything right. Like, his father would make impossible situations for him where Finley had to be wrong and then he had to be beaten. And, like, he would do it in secret that nobody else found out. And he and then when so Eve remembers one day that they all, like, in the summer, because Susie grew up with Eve, right? They lived in the same neighborhood, so she knew Finley also from they were children. And one summer they were all spending this day together. They were all cycling with another girl from the neighborhood, and Susie and this girl were racing really fast, but Eve and Finley couldn't, like, catch up to them. So they decided to sit under a tree, and they were just talking. And Eve was, like, in middle school, and, like, Finley was a few years, like, couple of years older. So she asks him, like, "Do you know what kissing is?" And he's like, "Yeah, obviously." And she's like, "Do you want to do that with me?" And so they kiss, like, really in middle school, like, innocent stuff. And then and then Susie and the other girl comes up, and then they all go home. And somehow Susie reaches home before Finley and Eve does, and then the moment Eve knocks at Susie's house, the Mr. Hart comes out and he's really angry at Finley that, oh, you left your sister alone. But then he realizes he was actually with Eve, so he's like, oh, it's okay, go inside. And then he drops Eve home, but then Eve now realizes and she asks him like, do you remember that day in the summer when we were cycling? Did you get beaten up that day? He's like, yeah, I did. And she's like, wait, was it because of me? Because you were with me? And he's like, no, if I left you alone and brought Susie home, I would have been blamed for that. And because I was with you and I left Susie alone, I still got beaten up. So there was no winning situation for me. And then as he's growing older, his dad had an affair with a secretary for 6 months. And those 6 months, he did not get beaten up. His dad did not beat him. And but then when his mother finds out and the affair stops, every time Finley's parents would fight, Finley would get beaten up. So he just, and he internalized his trauma so much and his abuse so much. He thought like maybe if my father had a different child, if a different son, maybe there was something wrong with me that I I went through all of this. And then Eve is like, no, don't blame yourself. Like, this is not your fault. He is a bad person. And then Finley tells her that before he left for New York, he took Susie to a bar to tell her that all of this had happened. He sits her down and tells her, like, dad has been abusing me for so many years and like he used to beat me unprovoked. And then Susie's like, don't be so dramatic, don't use the A word. You were a really problematic child, like, you weren't innocent too. Like, I'm sure you probably deserved it. And then that was the last time Finley ever said anything to anybody from his family, because everybody thought that he was a demon child. Like, he deserved all of the shit that his father put him through. And the allegations that were against him, that he didn't care about his mother, he didn't show up to her funeral, like he only showed up to her funeral, is because he didn't even know she was sick. Nobody told him that his mother was diagnosed. And like by the time he found out, and the anger and the grief, and he finally decides that, okay, I should go see her, she was dead. That's why everybody thought that this guy moved away, doesn't care about his family, he's so cold hearted and everything. But this is what this poor man went through. And that's why, like, he went to therapy, and then he decided that I want to be a psychiatrist too. And then Eve is just she's so sad for him. She's crying and everything. And like, she's like, please don't for 1 second think that any of this was your fault. This is not your fault. This man, is the abuser, and he deserves whatever karma is coming his way, Mr. Hart. And then Finn is like, it's okay, I'm okay now, I'm fine, my panic attack is done and everything. He's like, go sit in the car, I'll just say goodbye to my dad and we can leave. She's like, no, I'm not leaving you, I'm not leaving you with this man for a single second. Please let me rescue you. And then he's like, you've already rescued me, Eve. And then they say goodbye to Mr. Hart, and Ed Finley drives Eve to her house, and then he says, I'm leaving for America, and then I have no other reason to come back anymore. And then they both say that they love each other. They've realized that they have feelings for each other, and like, and Finley actually wants to work this out with Eve. Like, he's very grateful that he found her, and because his ex, like the girl he brought to his mother's funeral, they're not together anymore. But Finley is still in touch with her because she has a 5-year-old son from a previous relationship who Finley is really attached to. So that girl is still in his life and everything. And Eve asks him, like, what's your deal with Romilly? Like, are you guys gonna get back together or anything? And he's like, no, I mean, the day Romilly was breaking up with me, she said that I don't think you're in this relationship like completely is because you see a lot of yourself in me. Like, I'm also a very what are the words? He says that oh my god. He says that because I am so cynical and what are the other words? It because he's very cynical. He has no trust in other people.
Pessimistic. Pessimistic?
Yeah, pessimistic. And like he has no trust in other people. Romilly says he needs someone who's very gentle and kind and, is optimistic. And Eve is exactly like that. So he's like, I am so thankful. It feels like my whole life has been leading me back to you, Eve. And then they decide to, be together and somehow work this through. Eve is like, the shit you and I have went through have brought us here, and if we could survive that, we can survive anything. I really want you. I mean, we can make this work across New York and Nottingham. So 3 months later, it's another Thursday night. They're all back at the trivia bar in the pub. There's Justin and Ed and Eve, and there's also Finley. And then Justin also has a boyfriend now. He also had an ex who he broke up with because Justin is like, oh, I'm too young to settle down. But he realizes later after Susie's death that, Francis was the one and everything. So he goes back to him, apologizes, and gets him back. So Justin and Francis, Ed, Eve, and Finley are at the bar. They're again playing the trivia and everything. And this time, finally, they win because Finley apparently knows a lot about trivia and stuff. So he got a lot of right answers. And then for the last 3 months, Eve and Finley have been doing long distance. Like they keep flying back and forth and everything. So this time when Finley goes back, no, they're not engaged yet.
Oh.
But this time when Finley goes back to New York, a week later, Eve is gonna go and stay with him for a month or a couple of months. And then Ed is gonna house sit for her, and because Eve also has a cat, she needs somebody to cat sit for her. So Ed is like, yeah, I'm really grateful. I mean, it's not a trouble. I'm glad I can stay in your house. My apartment sucks. Now that he's broken up with Hester, apparently Hester got the house that they bought together.
Oh, rip.
So he has no girlfriend and no house, but Eve and Finley are happy together, and they finally win the trivia for once. The end.
Oh. That's awesome. Fuck Ed.
Fuck Ed. But the thing about this book is like when you see the cover, it's a guy and a girl on a hood of a car, and it says two friends, one night, and then everything changes. Like it's a very you expect it to be a rom-com, right? Even the first scene of how this book is set up, that this girl is pining over this guy, they're going to get married, he's going to realize, maybe you think that where the story is going, he's going to realize Eve is the one for him, he's going to leave his friend, right? But you never see the death coming, and then the abuse with Finley. When I read this book, it blew my fucking mind. When Reva told me, Sahar, read it. So, and all the time she just tells me a little bit about it, right? Like this is the premise of she didn't tell me anything. All she said is just read this book, Sahar. I was like, okay. I read the first page. Like if you Google the page also right now, Shreya, it does not read like anything that I've just told you. It does not look like anything I've just told you. It's a very rom-com-y book. But then when you finally read it...
What is this called again?
Just Last Night.
Just Last. You want me to look at the cover?
Yeah, look at the cover and read what's on the cover.
Two best friends, one mischance, a night that changes everything.
Yeah.
The funny thing is they're not even best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Misleading.
Yeah.
Catfish. Oh, but you know what it is? Maybe it's like a nod to her job.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good catch.
Because like her whole job is to write like catchy things. So that's what she did here.
Mm-hmm.
Like kind of twisted it so it makes you read it. So
yeah. When I was reading this book, it made me really sad. I was like, what the fuck? Like, how do you even process the loss of a friend like that? The huge void they leave in your life.
Yeah. I didn't expect Susie to just die.
I know, right?
I was like, what? What just happened?
It felt like I was reading Crescent City again. Like within 5 chapters, the best friend is dead.
Yeah.
I was like, this cannot be Danica Fender point 2 happening to me again.
Yeah, and I didn't expect her to actually sleep with Ed too.
I was like, whoa. Like, after that, I was just expecting another twist and turn. Every page I turned, I was like, now something, the other shoe is gonna drop. I really thought until the end that Finley was actually gonna turn out to be a bad guy. That this was all a ruse. Because, first the death, then the affair. What else is gonna happen in this book?
Okay.
I was just like, okay.
I kind of knew Finley was gonna be the love interest, mainly because okay, a deduction, right?
Yeah.
Ed sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she shouldn't end up with Ed regardless.
Yeah.
And then for multiple reasons, and then Finley shows up, and I was like, oh, he's probably just misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because if everyone hates him, typically that character will get like a redemption arc. Yeah, like redemption arc, or like that's not the full story and stuff and everything. And obviously Susie isn't a saint either, because she slept with Ed, knowing that like her friend likes him and has liked him for a while. So I was like, okay.
But typically the love interest is already on the page, right? But Finley comes into the book 50% of the way.
Oh, okay.
So halfway through the book, I'm like, so this is not going to be a love story at all.
Yeah,
there's going to be no love interest. But it's Finley, who we thought was the villain through half of the book.
Yeah, I was honestly like questioning the genre a little bit, because I didn't know if this was romantic.
It is supposed to be a rom-com, apparently. I'm like, where is the romance and the comedy?
I honestly thought it was gonna mystery, and then that we were going to figure out who killed Susie.
Yeah,
I thought that's where it's gonna go. I was like, okay, who is this drunk driver?
Oh, also
who hit the curb?
The driver wasn't drunk. The person who was driving had a stroke.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. So they are that. So Finley says this. He's like, I mean, it's worse for that person because he is gonna live with the awareness that he killed someone and he survived.
Yeah.
And then when Eve hears that, she's like, are you sympathizing for the person who killed your sister?
I mean, I feel like you should. The guy had a stroke.
Yeah. But she, at this point, doesn't know Finley is a good guy.
Oh.
She still thinks he is, the villain he's been told everyone that he is. So.
Oh, okay. So I was be like, I mean, kind of, yeah. If he had a stroke.
This was in the beginning during the funeral preparations. He's like, yeah, just imagine what the person who unknowingly killed Susie is going through. And Eve is like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You're sympathizing for a stranger over the people your sister was close to?
I feel like if you told me that before, I would have been like, yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Immediately, I would have been like, yeah, he's a good guy. He's not psychotic. Like, something's going on.
Yeah. And then the abuse by his father really shook me. It's like, damn, this poor guy. He went through so much. Everybody in his family hates him.
Yeah,
including his sister.
I didn't think it was going to be his dad. I thought it was his mom. I thought his mom abused him.
He didn't show up to the funeral.
Yeah, I thought something happened there. And I did think, like, okay, maybe his dad didn't, like, stood by his mom's side or something. Like, or it was secret and that's why he didn't show up. Like, something went down between him and his mom. And I was like, it's probably valid because he's a good guy. And then I was just like, okay, well, if he broke ties with Susie and the dad too, then they probably took the mom's side and he didn't show up.
Yeah.
From the beginning, I was just like, Finley is also just like a good guy name.
Yeah. And another characteristic which I realized at the end is like Ed is the blonde and Finley is the dark-haired man. I was like, obviously then Ed cannot be the love interest.
Yeah.
The girl never falls for the fair-haired man.
Yeah, it's never the blonde.
No, it's never the blonde.
It's always the brunette. It's always the
dark and mysterious.
Yeah, dark, mysterious, and depressed. Immediately, also when you said, yeah, I wanted to be, also, which psychiatrist isn't like a saint, When he said, oh, I was in therapy and then I dropped modeling to be a therapist. I was like, good guy.
Yeah.
I was, and then I was just thinking, like, do these people still think like what are they thinking to himself? Oh, he's such a horrible person.
Yeah.
And now he's helping other people.
Yeah.
Like, make it make sense.
Yeah, they were, because they have no contact with this person. All they hear about him is through Susie, who's their best friend,
Yeah.
who is putting his brother in a bad light all throughout his life. Like, she always shit talked him. Like, she rarely talked about him, but the times she even did, always bad things. Like, he doesn't call, I don't talk to him, he didn't show up to my mom's sickness or that bad, all of these things.
Yeah, I don't blame Susie that much. I mean, she's still like, I mean, fine, drunk night, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's not a saint.
Yeah.
Though.
Finley says to Eve, when they're having this conversation about the affair between Ed and Susie, that Susie is not innocent in this. Like, obviously Ed had his, like, whatever the thing is, had his cake and ate it too. But Susie, how much ever Finley knew him, never was in love, never fell in love. But you, Eve, were in love. So, and she was a little jealous and competitive kind of person. So she was just going through your closets when you were away. Like, she wanted to feel the feelings you were feeling for Ed, because she was Ed's friend also their whole life, but she never saw him in that light. She just wanted to experience what you were experiencing. So he's telling Eve that, whatever you think about Susie, take it with a grain of salt, because you are a kind of person who takes people by on their word, and you're always left with questions when they're gone. You are so optimistic and forgiving that you don't see the other side. That's why you also thought I was a villain and never gave me the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, because she believed the words.
Yeah, and you stayed in love with this douchebag for 16 years, even though he didn't leave his fiance. Or fiance to abhi bani hai. He didn't leave his girlfriend, didn't propose to her, slept with your best friend, and then always strung you along.
Yeah.
So Susie was also not completely innocent.
Yeah.
And Finley is like, Eve, you should realize that.
Yeah. So what? She just, at the end, she just like forgave
Susie?
Ed?
Yeah, she did.
Okay.
She forgave Susie too, because she's like, whatever happened, she was still my best friend. I loved her. I miss her a lot.
Okay.
And then Eve asks Finley, like, if your father did such bad things to you, why are you here? Why are you helping him? And he's like, this is my way of moving on. If I forgive him, if I do this one thing for him at the end, at his end of life, it proves that I'm not like him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he thought that his father saw himself in Finley. That's why he beat him up. But then this is just Finley's way of, like, moving on.
Yeah.
And then he's like, what would Susie would have done? Like, he asks Eve once, like, he's like, do you think if I was the one who died, do you think Susie would have shown up to Manhattan, arranged for my funeral, met with my best friends who thought I was the bad person? What do you think she would have done in that situation? And Eve is like, oh, okay. Like, we only know Finley from Susie's point of view, and Finley's friend only knows Susie from his point of view. Like, if the roles were reversed, what would have happened then? And then Eve is like, okay, I get your point. Like, we should back off a little bit. You're not a bad guy. This book really, made me think a lot, question a lot of things.
Like what?
Like relationships and stuff. Like, also contemplate, like, what would I do in a situation if I lost somebody so close to me so suddenly? Like, what would that feel like? And it's just, I was like, I don't want to ever think about it. I don't ever want to be in the shoes that Eve was in. Because how do you fill that void of somebody who is such an important part of your life just, suddenly leaving? How do you reconcile with that?
Yeah. I just don't know how she would have dealt with, like, finding out the secrets after she passed, Like, I feel like I feel for Eve. How can, like, because she's like, she's dead, but she also backstabbed me. So, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, am I allowed to be mad at someone who's dead?
Yeah.
That would be tough.
Yeah, like that's what Eve was struggling with. She was sad that her best friend is gone, but also angry with what she found out. It happened 10 years ago.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, obviously loss is loss and it sucks, whatever, and stuff.
Yeah.
But that just makes it worse. Like, if they were
Mhm.
completely innocent and she passed away, then she could be like, oh, she was a great person, blah, 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 loved her,
Yeah.
angel, whatever, and everything. But then right afterwards, finding out all the stuff, like the stuff that was important to her and was hidden for so long,
Mm.
and being like, well, this is going to be tough. Like,
Mhm.
now I have to mourn her loss, miss her, and also kind of like
Hate
hate
her.
her.
And hate the person who's also supposed to be my friend, supposed to help me through this grief.
Yeah, that's really tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just glad that they had like at least each other
Mm.
for it, you know?
Mhm.
Because I don't think Justin would have been helpful. I don't think obviously Ed would have been helpful and everything.
Yeah.
So
Mhm. Yeah. But this was a great read, honestly. So I just absolutely loved it.
cool. Okay, we can end it here.
Yes.
If this episode piqued your interest and you want more details, then read the book. See you in the next episode.